Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast, crossover edition today with the new host of the Locked On Baylor Bears podcast. It is Drake Toll. He's joining us today. Drake and I are going to talk all things Baylor Bears football as spring football is getting into gear, a little bit of hoops as well. All that's coming up on today's show.
Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Joining me, it is Drake Toll. He covers the Baylor Bears now for Locked On. It's growing, Drake. We always love to have new hosts. Let's see. So now we've got Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas, TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor. I mean, it's easier now to count the ones we don't have. KU, Kansas State, Iowa State, and then I'm forgetting West Virginia are the only four that we don't have. So we love to have you. Tell us how you came about Locked On and your time before covering the Bears.
My man, Josh, first and foremost, super excited to do a crossover today. And I cover Baylor for Sikkim 365, an outlet here in Waco that's really kind of gone national for Baylor coverage and hosted a lot of podcasts and shows for those guys for a while. And it felt like the one thing the Baylor community was missing was a daily podcast, right? Like a quick hitter, give me 30 minutes of all Baylor specific stuff. No NFL, no other colleges, not Big 12 coverage, just Baylor. And so a couple weeks ago, somebody locally reached out and said, "Hey, there's an opening. There's a spot." It's been done before, right? Locked On Baylor has existed twice to this point. So this is round 3. And they
Third
said,
time's a charm.
Third time's a charm. And you're the guy that can possibly get it up off the ground and roll. And I said, maybe I am that guy. And here we are. And so, a couple weeks in now, and it's been great. But when they reached out to me, the process in itself took they were like, hey,
fast.
It's going to take 3 weeks maybe. And I was like, no, we can do this. And so within 10 days, we were on the air and ready to roll. And so, man, so far there's been headlines have been at no shortage, which is exactly what you want when you're jumping into a new podcast. And dude, it's been a blast. I love being a part of Locked On and now giving Baylor fans a place they can go every day and get just Baylor.
I agree. I think you are the man. I will say this. So I just recorded the national championship review about Kansas beating North Carolina. And it's relevant because obviously Baylor was their last national champion. And I would just say, I think it's excellent that we, look, I think a lot of people in this conference resent Kansas, and I understand why, right? They do not try at football most of the time. And so, they're just kind of there. And it's nice to have a win. But, you like everybody to be semi-competitive. But basketball has really been the thing where they run the conference for a long time. Along came Texas Tech. Along came Baylor. And really along came Baylor with that national championship. So your thoughts on Kansas winning and just kind of the rising tides that are Baylor and Kansas, they might be destined to trade hands for not just the Big 12 title, maybe national titles here for a few years to come.
I think so, Josh. And it's a great point that you make in that sometimes there are other Big 12 schools that are like, the SEC is really good at being like, hey, as long as they're an SEC school, we're going to root for them, as long as they're playing at a national level. And Big 12 fans are like, no, I want it to myself. And I had a conversation with someone in athletics here at Baylor. And they're like, I just want a few more years for Baylor to be the only Big 12 team to, the last Big 12 team to have won a national championship. And so I think that pit a few Baylor fans against Kansas. And I'm going to get on my soapbox. People also have this thing where anytime a program is really good, they're always like, oh, their day is coming. The FBI, they're going to get them one of these days without it doesn't matter who it is or how good they are, how bad, it just kind of is what comes with having that level of prowess. So for me, when I'm watching the game last night, I'm thinking, I can't stand Brady Manick. He's a Big 12 throwaway, right? This entire North Carolina team, sure, it's a good story, but they beat Baylor in the tournament. And man, the Big 12, seeing the Big 12 at that level, You know, you've got the last 4 years, the team's been in the Final Four. The last 3 years, the team's been in the title. They've won 2 in a row. And I don't think it's disputable anymore on what the best basketball conference in America is. It's the Big 12. When you point to Baylor, Kansas, Tech, and the list goes on. So for me, watching the game last night, it solidified this conference as the premier conference in college basketball. And I'm not upset about that.
Yeah, I think it is. It's this weird balance between regular season and postseason. I mean, the AC, I got a lot of friends that live in ACC country, and they say, well, the ACC, it's still the best basketball conference. Look, Carolina's been to 3 of the last 6 title games, and obviously Duke's going to still be there, and UVA got that title back in 19. This was a down year for the ACC. I mean, Two things can be true. It was a down year in the regular season for the ACC, and also they had a lot of really good tournament success. What I'd say is the Big 12 is not, they don't have that problem. It's pedal to the metal the entire time. Iowa State lost 1 game outside of the Big 12 this year. 1 game outside the Big 12. And that ended up being to Miami in the end, at the end of that run there. And then Miami goes on to get killed by Kansas and their Big 12 teams. So kind of Big 12 gets that one back. But so that's why I would say, look, the ACC has those moments where, yes, it can go, fist for fist with the Big 12. It can throw hands, but on a game in, game out basis, like Kansas State makes the tournament if they're in any other conference this year. They probably make the tournament. The Big Ten, it's like, it's great to hear about, OU's another team that would have definitely made the tournament. It's great to hear about the Big Ten, all your regular season success, suck in the tournament, right? Yeah. ACC, not very good in the regular season, great in the tournament, not putting it all together. Pac-12, same problem, right? Just not a really good regular season, only put 3 teams in. Honestly, tournament wasn't that great for them either. SEC, not a great tournament run, save Arkansas, saving their ass in the end. I mean, people can throw around whatever the hell they want at this point in time, right? The Big 12 is a few bounces of the ball away in that Texas Tech game from being back to back national champions. And let's not forget, in 2020, KU and Baylor were, KU was going to be the number 1 overall seed, and Baylor was probably going to be a 1 or a 2. So they would have had a really nice chance of winning that one as well.
Yeah, you're looking at, and I'm glad you brought up the ACC point. It is, people will look and say, hey, that's quality over quantity, right? But in the Big 12, you get both. You get quality and quantity because you have 6 teams that are undefeated in round 1 of this year's NCAA tournament. The Pac-12 is, the biggest dud this season. USC is the world beater. UCLA, the world beaters. Arizona had, everybody has them going to the championship in their bracket, and they get bounced. Almost should have been bounced by TCU. Neither here nor there for the TCU.
Yes, they should have. TCU got screwed. TCU
Sorry about that. That's just a little knife, twist in the knife right there for the TCU fans. But you're right, too. And the SEC just doesn't meet the caliber level of the Big 12. Somebody mentioned this, too. In the Baylor, I saw this tweet. I wish I could credit the person. In the Baylor, North Carolina game, a ton of people were tweeting, like, this game is too physical, and this is not how the game should be played. It's like, that's another night in the Big 12.
Yeah, it is.
Like, watch the Kansas game last night, and those dudes are on the floor. I mean, they're fighting for the basketball. And that is what Big 12 basketball is, and I'm not upset about it.
Every night. Every night was the crazy thing, and that's why I was so impressed with North Carolina last night, because I was thinking, could they really go a full 40 playing this level of physicality? And they held up. I mean, they held up. The shots of Puff Johnson, just, I know people say, oh, you got hit in the stomach, whatever. He was exhausted. He was absolutely gassed. To see those guys, go toe to toe with Kansas was really shocking. But you see it like a lot of these games, like the Miami Kansas game, like no team is prepared for how good some of these Big 12 teams are and how tough they are. That combination. That's why it was so surprising, or not surprising, but it was so impressive when Duke took out Texas Tech. I was like, wow, okay, this Duke team can actually, they really do have my respect now, and they were able to do it. The big thing is, I would love to see these teams do it night in and night out, because they talk about, the Big Ten beats each other up. No, they don't. Come play in the Big 12. We're like the guards, the leading rebounders, right? You got 5 guys crashed in the glass. Everybody's fighting, and big, Baylor, I think they were a casualty of this year, just because of the amount of injuries that stacked up for them and the lack of depth. And to see them fight as hard as they did to the very end was really impressive. I want to get your thoughts real quickly on this. Jerome Tang to Kansas State. Long overdue, right? That he gets a head coaching job. But what's been the impact there? And are you guys bittersweet, I guess I would say, to see Coach Tang leave and get a head coaching job, but also in the conference as well?
Josh, dude, I hate Marvel. I'm going to go out there and say it. And that I know that shoots me in the foot, right? But I've watched those Spider-Man movies where, like, the recent ones, his suit, anytime his suit gets punctured by something, it just like regenerates immediately. Welcome to Baylor men's basketball.
Yeah.
When a portion of the staff leaves, you're just regenerating immediately with something else. So, from the standpoint of being on the ground here in Waco and what that's changed, it really hasn't been anything. I don't think we felt the effects of that. But I do think that we will with this one, because Jerome Tang was the first guy that Scott Drew brought on. And if you've heard the story of how he was brought on, it's wild. The guy was down to his last $10 when Scott Drew hired him. So I think Kansas State is getting and I'll say this and I'll stand by it, the premier assistant in college basketball to go off the board this year. If there's anybody who is next man up out of that slot, it's got to be Jerome Tang. And I think what you're seeing is a spark ignited in their program automatically. Like, I haven't seen this much luster around Kansas State in at least a few years in the basketball realm. And so I think Jerome Tang replaces a coach who everyone has a ton of respect for, which is a tough thing to do no matter how good or bad they were. Right. And I think he's going to fill that role well.
Yeah, I know that's the nature of this league too, is that, I mean, Bruce Weber goes to the Elite Eight, a few years ago, and now he's gone already. And look, it wasn't like it was a bad year, but it was with this group of guys, he needed to win, and he just didn't win enough. And that is the nature of this league now. That's how it's going to be. I mean, there's been questions about, is this kind of the end of the line now for Bob Huggins of West Virginia? It's crazy to say. This guy's, he just announced him to be the Hall of Fame, but I actually think it's not wrong to ask questions. So it just shows you how difficult it is to win in this league. Let's take a quick break here and get a word in from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. Go to Built.com today. That's Built.com. Check out all the flavors that they've got available. Guys, candy bars, ditch those. They've got 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Built Bars taste just as good as a candy bar. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. They've got mint brownie, coconut almond, and new for this month, chocolate chip cookies and cream. When you guys go to Built.com, it's Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com today. All right, so a big question, Drake, everybody's kind of wondering here is the Big 12 this season in terms of football does seem, I don't think I'd say the second spot is pretty open. Oklahoma is going to be there to me. I think Oklahoma, as good of a job as anybody could have done with the circumstances. I thought Brent Venables did a good job revamping that roster. You bring in an offensive coordinator like Jeff Lebby, you're going to be able to attract some good talent, and they have done so. So to me, I think it's pretty clear with where everybody else is that Oklahoma is the favorite, but I think it's going to be an all-out brawl for that second spot in the conference. Also, big note too, OU is going to be favored in probably every single one of their games this year. That's something that we have to factor into. That's why I'm so high on them. Schedule breaks well for them, but the teams that I'm really wondering about: Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Texas. Those are that second tier. Those next three teams: Texas because of talent, Oklahoma State, and Baylor because of what they accomplished. I'm assuming it's all positive momentum around one Dave Aranda in the program right now.
Yeah, you'd never believe it. The way that this program is turned around, the things that I heard in year number one, where Dave goes 2-7, and the folks are like, "Oh, he doesn't have it. He needs to yell a little bit." I'll tell you this. Granted, he didn't yell a ton last season. I've seen him really get fired up in spring practice this year, and what I love about it, Baylor just got linebacker Josh White, transfer from LSU, 4-star guy, was the number 9 inside linebacker in the country coming out of high school. And so adding him to a defense that's losing Terrell Bernard, Jalen Petrie, those guys. And then an offense is losing Tyquan Thornton. Your wide receiver room is going to look a lot different going into the season for Baylor. So you have a couple question marks, but I'll tell you, Josh, when I think of sustained success, right, one thing that's going to win you games at home or on the road, offensive and defensive lines. So Baylor went into the transfer portal to bolster a defensive line by getting Jackson Player from Tulsa. And then you got Siaki Ika, who became a breakout player in the Big 12 toward the end of the year last season. Chidi Obanaya, Gabe Hall's also back there, Garmin Randolph. You're looking at a solid list of 5 or 6 guys that are, I say that they're the buzzword guys, right? Every program has those dudes you can say, and the general fan's going to know who they are. When you have 6 of those on the defensive line, that's probably a good sign. And then the offensive line, you have 4 of 5 starters returning from one of the top 3 O-lines in the Big 12 last season. 2 quarterbacks back. Both of your starting quarterbacks are back. So you're replacing running back, wide receiver, but you're looking at the core where you really want your team to be good is returning. The secondary looks solid in spring practice too. I'm telling you, I think Gerry Bohannon takes the next step up, and he has so far. The most impressive part of Baylor's pro day wasn't Jalen Petrie or Terrell Bernard. It was the way that Gerry Bohannon was throwing the routes to the receivers that were running pro day. So Baylor's in the spot. I know Oklahoma probably is they're your de facto number 1 every year at this point, but Baylor is in that conversation, of course. The only problem, I think you alluded to it perfectly, the game's in Norman. Baylor's got to go to Oklahoma, and this schedule playing in Ames, in Austin, in Norman doesn't favor the Bears.
Yeah, that's part of this too. And I think for them, you look at the 2022, just like what the big question is, it's quarterback, right? It's where everybody's going is the quarterback. So I know there's one school of thought that is Gerry Bohannon was the quarterback last year, and they did a lot of winning while he was the quarterback. I felt like they protected him. I felt like they really did a good, there's a lot of talk early in the season about Gerry Bohannon does not turn the ball over. He has not turned the ball over. He made a lot of bad decisions late in the season. A lot of bad decisions. I thought they played great defense. They ran the football. They got really lucky. They had a diamond in the rough, if you will, in Abram Smith, who is a phenomenal, tough, awesome runner who didn't have a lot of miles on him in that department because he was obviously playing linebacker before. And so my question is, is it fair to say, all right, do we do the Bohannon next step thing, or do we really have a conversation about should it be Blake Shapen? Now, it sounds like from all early returns, you're not the first person I've talked to who's been like Gerry Bohannon. It's kind of all here. So you tell me, is it Gerry, or do we need to have the Blake Shapen all out battle? Let these guys figure it out in the field.
I think they're in the middle of a battle right now. And that's what Dave Aranda has said. That's what quarterback coach Sean Bell, Jeff Grimes, the OC, they've all said the same thing, that there is a battle in the offseason, figure out who the next quarterback is of the Baylor Bears, which again, they're both starting caliber quarterbacks. I wouldn't be upset with either, but at this point, it truly is Gary's job to lose. You're right. The first half of the season, he didn't have as many turnovers, played really well, but he also played really safe. And you can't play safe and win a Big 12 championship or go, win a Sugar Bowl most of the time. And that's what you could see Baylor's offense really start to uncork some stuff later in the year to try to win those tougher games. Kansas State on the road being one of those. So Gerry got you there. And I think that's not going to fall on deaf ears with his coaching staff. So yeah, it's tough. Flipping Blake Shapen broke a facility record at Dallas Cowboy Stadium, AT&T Stadium, for most completions in a row in the first half, right? Like you can't.
How many was it? Was it
17?
17?
Like that's unbelievable. So the dude, or it was 15. He went 15 to 17. That's what it was.
Right.
And that in itself, you're going to bench the guy that's got an AT&T State. That's where the Cowboys play, but it doesn't say much nowadays, but even so.
Well, then you look at the second half too. It was like kind of disaster.
Exactly. Well, he hurt his shoulder in the first half, and
that is true. Yeah. Also, that Oklahoma State defense in second halves was really freaking good.
They woke up. Where was that in the first half? They could have won a Big 12 championship, but obviously they didn't. And no, we're not too upset about that. But you're right. There are 2 schools of thought. The first school being, hey, what can Blake Shapen do? We saw flashes of it. If you can put it all together, Baylor's in a great spot. The other school is Gerry was your guy. If you really unleash him, he could take the next step this year and be a first team, second team, all Big 12 caliber guy. And then there's the random third sect, right? If there's the Republicans and the Democrats, there's also the Green Party. The Green Party is the Kyron Drones party.
Yeah, I've heard about this too.
I am the Green Party too. Like I'm at spring practice. Like if you see this guy, He's every bit of 6'2", like 300 pounds in the bet. Like if he hits me, I'm dead, or anyone
Mhm.
else. And I would love to see him on the football field. Don't think we're going to get it. Somebody's probably got to transfer out of that group, but I don't think it's Gerry Bohannon. I think G-Bo's your guy to start next season as it sits right now.
So it's so interesting. And I love the thing I love about Dave Aranda too. I say this: he does not win the press conference; he wins you games.
Oh.
That's what he does, right? That's kind of what Dave Aranda is, and he is the most thoughtful coach I think I've ever actually seen speak. Like, he is really thoughtful about he's been really open about what went wrong in 2020. Many articles have been written, but you don't have to read the articles. You can just listen to him talk. Like, he is so honest, and that's why I really think he's going to be such a successful coach. Is he's like, okay, there are problems.
So
I address
this right
problems.
here, Josh,
Yes.
this right here is a Sugar Bowl hat, right?
Okay.
Like
Yes.
you and I, we look at this hat, we say, this is a Sugar Bowl hat. If you're listening and not watching, it's a Sugar Bowl
The
hat.
Sugar Bowl hat. Yeah.
Dave Aranda looks at this and says, that is an intricately woven
Right.
piece of fine fabric that is so well. No, Dave, it's
a
a
hat.
hat. It's a hat. But that's what makes him so good.
Yeah, he's just so thoughtful. And, he talked about what went wrong with that staff. And then, look, you bring in Eric Mateos and Jeff Grimes, and, now they didn't make Gerry Bohannon look like, what's his face? Totally blank. Zach Wilson. But,
Yeah.
I mean, really good, right? Really, really good. And also the offensive line play. I think there are a lot of people out there that were thinking, look, this is their offensive line is not this good, not as good as their numbers say, but they're performing at this level. And it kind of is what it is. I actually think their line's got a chance to be that good, as good as the numbers say, because they're returning guys, a lot of guys back, like you said, 4 or 5. What are they going to do at running back? What's the situation at running back? Because that is a big conversation point, right? After losing both Ebner and you lose Abram Smith, who is the horse.
Yeah.
If you
To
will.
me, that is the conversation point in the offseason, almost more so than the quarterback battle. And the reason why is right now, your perceived number one, who's getting those reps in spring ball, is named Tay McWilliams. And say that name around 97% of Baylor fans, and they'll go, who?
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself, not a bad thing. He's looked great in spring ball. But Tay McWilliams, a guy named Squirrel Williams, who is like a 7th-year dude, has gotten hurt almost every year. You got Quaylon Jones, who's trying to revive it. Like, I don't know if I've seen him on the field since his freshman season when he was pretty solid. And now he's trying to come back. One of those guys, you're like, he's still on the team? And
Right.
they've moved Josh Fleeks from wide receiver to running back. I think they'll end up putting Fleeks back out in the slot position as the season moves on, but at least he's there for depth purposes. So at running back, I just don't know right now. And Tay McWilliams has it. My confidence is if Abram Smith, now granted, it's not like this guy came out of nowhere and learned the running back position in 1 year. He was an all-state running back in high school, so he'd been there before. But I think if you could take a linebacker who you've just trained to be a linebacker for 3 seasons and get him to produce at the level Abram Smith did, I've got confidence in what Jeff Grimes can do with like, hey, Drake Toll's the starting running back. All right, Jeff Grimes is the coach. There's got to be something there, right? So with Tay McWilliams inserted there behind Eric Mateos' line, basically with this O-line, give me a warm body, and I think you're going to get a couple of yards. And if a worst case scenario, and I've asked this question, who's the power back? Gerry Bohannon. Give him the ball, 4th and 6 inches. That dude's huge. Just let him fall forward, right? And I think you're in business.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting on offensive end. On defensive end, like you mentioned, right? You got to replace Jalen Petrie. You got to replace Terrell Bernard. But I mean, this is Dave Aranda, and this is a guy who's producing national championship winning defenses, right?
Yeah.
Big 12 now, Big 12 championship winning. And like the identity of his team was pretty clear. Like they were one of the tone setters. The reason why I think that these two teams, Oklahoma State and Baylor, we saw them last year is because Dave Aranda knew what he wanted the identity of this team to be. And then Mike Gundy was like, I am no longer Mike Gundy. I am defense and running the football, Mike Gundy. This is what we do at Oklahoma State. So I think his willingness to adapt is what helped them. So I would say, like, yeah, you hate losing 2 players like that, but it's Dave Aranda. They're going to find guys to replace him. And also they're going to coach the hell out of the guys that they have.
Yeah. I think the best news for Baylor fans in the conversation between Oklahoma State and Baylor, one, they're playing in Waco, which that was the first major road game for Gary. And you just hear
That was an awful football game too. That was a
it was
horrible football
terrible.
game.
It was not, there were no, there was not even good defense. It was just
Right.
bad everything.
Yeah.
The people that are like, it was a defensive bet. No, it wasn't. It was just not good football. Quarterbacks were missing everything. And and here's what Spencer Sanders. I think he threw like 11 interceptions last year, and 5 or 6 of them were to Baylor. He had 4 in the Big 12 championship game. It was laughable. So when he plays Baylor, he's good for at least 2 interceptions. Baylor fans can be happy about that much. They play in McLean Stadium, so I think you give Baylor the nod there. But I do believe that you're right. Dave Aranda, if there's one thing that it's like, hey, if we don't need stars in one area, it's defense, because that's where Dave Aranda can still get you there through. He's a schematic genius, and I got a lot of confidence in him, which I'd like to know from your perspective. How do Baylor and Oklahoma? No, I don't want to go there. I want to go here. How do Baylor and Texas match up next season?
Here's the thing about Texas. I've got so many questions about them, but the big one that I really care about is what's your strength and conditioning look like? Because they were shot out of a cannon in all of their games and then just absolutely sucked down the stretch in like all of their games. And I'd heard some people who've been to some of the games saying, well, they really do get after it in the pregame, and those guys are going and they're ready for the game, but they're a little tired when it ends. Is that the reason? Is there something else? Because is it as simple as the strength and conditioning was not good enough, or pregame routine? Because that's talented group of guys that, look, you could gash them. I mean, late in the game, you could run all over that Texas team. If you wanted to, they weren't hard to stop. I feel like a lot of 3-and-outs. Baylor game's another perfect example, right? I think they had a 2-score lead in that game. And then the fourth quarter, I mean, it was like 8-9 yards every single carry. Baylor was punching it down their throats. And I think that one was at McLean, right? I think the game
correct.
was,
Yeah. In Waco, yeah.
And so that's the big question, because talent wise, especially this recruiting class, Texas they look awesome. They look great getting off the bus. I want to give it another year for for Steve Sarkisian, Pete Kwiatkowski, all those guys to begin coaching up that team to see what it looks like. Because, it's the talent's not a question, but when has the talent been a question at Texas? Yeah. We haven't been talking about, I think Charlie Strong teams maybe had a little bit of deficit, but Tom Herman was a good recruiter. Steve Sarkisian's been good at recruiting so far. So I'm not sure this is going to be the group that I'm going to measure against Baylor to see have we hit because Baylor is a great barometer for toughness. I don't know if this is the group this year to measure against. Now, people want success. They want it now. There's going to be heat on Texas, even though there shouldn't be. And so, I'm really curious as kind of like what 2023 Texas looks like. Are we getting those big dudes? Are we developing them? So this year, I would say, can you give me 4 good quarters? You're at home, win those games. I'm just kind of looking across the board for them. Like, can we do 4 good quarters in every game we play?
Yeah, no, I think year number 1 for Steve Sarkisian, his litmus test looks the exact same as Tom Herman's. From a recruiting standpoint to on the field standpoint to a record, everything really kind of follows. So you lose to Kansas. Not to say and that's the growing pains of a first-year head coach. It's going to happen. And people are always like, well, if Dave Aranda can win 12 games in year 2 at Baylor and Texas are vastly different jobs. I'd argue to say it's easier to win 12 games at Baylor in year 2 than it is Texas, which is wild. Like, people are going to there's pushback to that, but the pressure of that job is insurmountable. Not to mention, at Baylor, you got 3-star, 4-star players who are there for the culture, right? At Texas, you have 5-star guys that are ready for the NFL. To coach that to 12 games in today's college football, to coach that to even stay in your program and not transfer, is a job within itself. Therefore, I do believe Texas winning 12 games this season, pretty unreasonable.
Yeah, no, I think it's another year where the Big 12 probably does not see themselves have a team in the college football playoff. I think also Texas has Alabama this year. Yeah. So good luck with that. All right, one more quick word from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by Rock Auto and rockauto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models for cars, it's now impossible to go to your local chain auto parts store to get all the parts that you need. Don't endure the pointless and seemingly endless and intimidating questioning from the guy behind the desk while they sort for your parts and only give you the parts they have. Go to rockauto.com. It's easy to do. When you guys go there, you'll save up to 30, 50, or even 100% more on the parts that you buy there compared to a chain store or a dealership. When you go to rockauto.com, write Locked On there. How did you hear about us box? That way they know we sent you. Amazing selection, always low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. That's rockauto.com. All right, Drake, let the folks know, where can they find you? Where can they find the show? Where can they get involved with Locked On Baylor if they would like to?
Folks, first and foremost, you got to follow Locked On Baylor on Twitter. That's where a lot of our stuff goes out. And then on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that you get your podcast, Locked On Baylor is there. And YouTube. Next week, we're starting it up on YouTube. So we'll have a video element that's opening up. Just waiting for a couple of things on the back end to be all set to build that account up and then start growing it. And so you want to find us, you're a Baylor fan out there who's listening today, Locked On Baylor, wherever you get your podcasts. And starting next week, Locked On Baylor on YouTube. Follow the Twitter. Boom. Shameless plug. Locked On Baylor, right?
Love that. That's what we're here for. You guys can find me on Twitter at @JoshNeighbors_. You guys can find the show at LO Big 12, where we are wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. Drake, my friend, it was a pleasure.
Oh, dude, so fun. Let's do this once a month, right?
We'll do it once a month. You and I will break things down, and we'll do. We know if as needed, we can do it more often. So always love talking to you. Looking forward to doing it again.
Great. Thanks so much, Josh. Pleasure.